This is our group presentation for CRJ 470 Discretionary Justice. Our group consisted of Ashley, Colin, Kaylee, Lucio, and myself, Tyler. Our case scenario involves a rape victim, Irene Baker, and our group presentation examines the different decision making and the discretionary choices made throughout the process, from the suspect to the police officer, parole officer, to the prosecutor, and finally the judge who renders the final verdict, and how each impact and discretion has another impact on the following discretion choice made up until the final person, being the judge, rendering the verdict and deciding the final fate and what is best for the community members and the safety of those community members and the defendant themselves. So the case details play an important role in the decision making and the discretion choices made by all people involved inside the criminal justice and legal system when deciding the fate of the defendant in the criminal proceeding. So our victim, Irene Baker, was 81 years old, was a community member for over 40 years, and was also a female. So you can already tell by that description that Irene may or may not had much social interaction outside of her home. She may not have had a husband, or she may not have had anyone that she had daily contact with because of relatives who have passed or lost touch, or her inability to reach out to other people. She also was a female, and then she also lived in the house, her same house, for over 40 years, which is important because she's been a part of this community for a long time, and she has not had problems like this involving Nathan Herman, who was the perpetrator of the crime, who was 39 years old, is a male, and has 2 prior convictions and prison sentences beforehand. So he has a rap sheet that he's built himself, and he's also a threat to the community because he's known that Irene has lived there for over 40 years, and it's important to understand that he recognizes this factor in committing this crime. Some of the details that are involved inside this case are important to look at when rendering a decision on how to process and convict Nathan Herman, to decide whether or not he's guilty and if there's enough reasonable evidence to convict him of this crime. So Nathan's DNA, his sperm, was found on the mattress sheets of Irene Baker. That is when the sheriff's department or police officers decided to take an oral swab and sample from Nathan himself, and they found a DNA match that hit on Nathan. So the DNA in the oral swab connected him to the crime. Our crime also took place in California. In California, charges can include a stiff 3 to 8 year sentence for sexual assault or rape. Any inflicted bodily harm can also include an additional 3 to 5 years applied or tacked on to that sentence. And there's also a 3-strike law, which is a 25 year to life, which is important for Nathan to recognize when deciding. In our next slide, we will discuss that a little bit further, but weighing Nathan's options and recognizing what he has gotten himself into. The crime was committed inside Irene Baker's own home while she was asleep, and she was met inside her house, her room, by Nathan Herman. That is when Nathan Herman threatened Irene with a knife to gain her compliance, thus tied her, turned her around, and assaulted her through forced penetration. He then threatened her and that he was going to make a return to hurt her in another way if she made an attempt to contact authorities. When Nathan's evidence linked him to the crime, at this point Nathan has a few options to decide to commit to, rendering his fate and the criminal proceedings. Nathan can decide to admit guilt, plead not guilty, or no contest, because he recognizes his best decision would be to admit guilt, because Nathan recognizes that his 2 prior convictions in the state of California could render him under the 3-strike law, which would sentence him to 25 years to life. So his best option is to just admit guilt and hope for a plea deal or a lesser sentence, showing some sort of remorse and recognition for the crime that he's committed. But it's also important to understand his perspective in this process, and you want to look at from different perspectives. Later on in the slideshow, you'll see, why did Nathan commit this crime? And I believe that personally he understood Irene's vulnerability and the easy access to committing this crime, and he is a prior criminal, so he is a threat to the community. So these are typical actions or behaviors that he displays, and he has a pattern because of the 2 prior convictions. And I think that he also believed that he could commit this crime without Irene, without any consequences, and without Irene having any contact with anyone else, being that he knows where she lives, and that being that she's a part of this, she's been a part of this community for over 40 years, he has to have known how vulnerable she is inside of her own home, and her outside contact, and her social interactions with other people, which made this crime more desirable for Nathan. The police officer also has the decision to charge Nathan with the crime that he finds suitable for him, now that he has the suspect's prior record, the victim's recommendation, and based upon her age and her characteristics, what he believes would be the best sentence for Nathan, based upon the evidence and the reasonable suspicion that he has, which he obtained from a neighbor who was worried for Irene and her own safety and had concern about her, who then let him cut the fence of his own, fence to gain access to Irene without being seen on the street. Because and that's an important factor in this, because Nathan probably lives close by, or has been checking in on Irene to make sure that there are no police officers on the street or coming to visit her. Now, the prosecutor's discretion and his sentence that he is going to propose to the judge depends on what the police officer has decided to charge Nathan with, and whether or not the evidence is strong enough to convict Nathan of that crime. And they want to convict Nathan of, and as the prosecutor, we wanted to make sure in this case that we made the correct decision for both the victim and the community itself. And since this crime was committed in California, the sentence will be a lot harsher towards him. So he could be charged with 3 to 8 years in prison, and if there was any injury to Irene again, it would be a 3 to 5 year tack on to his sentence. And as a prosecutor, we decided with our group that we will take the case to court and not settle for a plea deal. So in the end, hopefully Nathan will be charged 25 years to life in prison for the rape of Irene, based upon his prior convictions also. Also, as the judge, there's a lot of pressure, political pressure, to make the right decision for the community, and the most reasonable and rational choice for the safety of the community members and Irene herself. So as the judge, you want to look at Nathan's prior convictions, his rap sheet, to determine what sort of threat he poses to communities and community members. The evidence against Nathan, which is pretty compelling. His DNA had linked him to Irene Baker's room. And from that point in time, the judge can make the decision in what to sentence Nathan based upon Irene's ability to defend herself, which the police officer in our case wanted to pass along to the prosecutor and the judge to let them know that Irene had no chance in stopping this crime, and that you could tell that this was not consensual based upon the age difference between Nathan and Irene. So our judge in our project decided to to sentence Mr. Herman Nathan to 25 years to life, and without a chance of parole due to the use of a deadly weapon and prior convictions, and that prison has not rehabilitated Nathan before, so there's no reason to give him the opportunity to change or rehabilitate once inside prison. He has shown that that has not had an impact on himself. But it's important to understand that the judge also has the choice to give Nathan the chance or opportunity for parole at the 25-year mark of his sentence. But at that point, he would, at the opportunity of parole, he would have to be paroled as a lifetime sex offender as part of that requirement.